And let me see if we can.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let people in from the waiting room.
And Theresa, can you see it full slide
I
from where
can
you're
see
at?
it full slide, and then I've got the notes. I've got a PowerPoint next to me with my laptop, so I'll be able to read my notes from there as well.
Great.
All right, welcome everybody to another journalist development series. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Okay, Drew, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do the LinkedIn live. So if you want to go ahead and.
Yeah, of course. So I'll introduce myself. I'll introduce our wonderful guest here. But first, welcome MVJ members to the 2025 Journalist Development Series. The topic for this month is the power of voice storytelling through podcasting for journalists. My name is Drew Lawrence. I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm an Army veteran, currently work at military.com as a reporter covering the Marine Corps. And I also host, edit, and produce our military.com's flagship podcast called Firewatch. I've been podcasting for about 4 years now, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our guests here today. We have with us an active duty naval officer, podcast host, and change agent, Theresa Carpenter. She's an active duty Navy commander with 29 years of experience. And she began out her career as an enlisted aviation electrician. She commissioned as an officer in 2006. And then in 2008, she transitioned to public affairs. She's deployed 3 times to combat zones and holds 2 master's degrees, one in mass communications from San Diego State University and another in national security from the Naval War College. And beyond her military career, Theresa is a passionate storyteller and advocate for service. She hosts the Stories of Service, or SOS podcast, which highlights everyday people making an impact in their communities. She also runs Theresa's Tapestries, which is a blog where she shares insights on leadership, personal growth, navigating transitions, including her own as she prepares for retirement from active duty. Also, she served as the public affairs officer on the board of directors for the Sea Services Leadership Association, and she currently serves as the MS president for the America First Veterans. But I'm so excited to hear from you, Theresa. I'm looking forward to your presentation and your insight today, and moderating this. So, without further ado, welcome, Theresa, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Drew, for the warm introduction. And thank you to the MVP group, Military Veterans and Journalism Group, for giving me this opportunity to present what I've learned on podcasting, what to keep in mind if you'd like to start a podcast, and what I would do better, knowing what I know now. Just like Drew, I've been doing this about 4 years. But first off, let's just go to that first slide. So the picture you see there on the left, that is me as a AE2 Pickard. That was in my late 20s. As I got picked up for Seaman to Admiral, they played a joke on me in the ready room and said that I needed to come down and talk to the captain or talk to the CO, the squadron CO. And I thought I was in trouble for something. I didn't know what I had done. And I walk in and everybody's there letting me know that I got selected. It was really a transformative moment, because I knew by doing that, I was going to make a career out of the United States Navy. At that point, I was undecided. I had been in only about, I think, 6 years at that mark, E5. And I thought maybe I would do my first enlistment and maybe one more and then get out. But I wanted to put an officer package in and see what would happen. And that's what happened. I got selected. The picture you see over there on the right was my last tour at NATO. That's me moderating a press conference for one of our Spanish flagships. We have a frigate that is in charge of each one of the NATO battle groups. They call them Standing Naval Task Forces. And that was just a wonderful opportunity. We brought in some local media. I believe that was the one that we did when not Finland, but I can't remember off the top of my head right now. I'm zoning out, but we had two nations that joined NATO while I was there, and I think that was the second one that had joined, and that was our press conference that was commemorating that event. So those are just two kind of key moments in my career that are very memorable to me and will always stay with me as I go to transition. So next slide. So a lot of people want to know, like, why even bother podcasting? Like, is this something we really should do? And I would say, I hope by the end of this presentation that it's something that you consider doing, because it is a lot of work, but there is a lot of reward. And one of the things that really surprised me about this slide that I just hadn't kept in mind was a lot of people think that the age group of people who listen to podcasts are mostly people that are older or people who are a certain demographic, but what they found is like the largest demographic of people that are listening to podcasts are in the 13 to 17 age year group. So that really surprised me how much of a share. And then the second one is, of course, 45 to 54, which is the one that I would have thought would have been the first demographic that is engaging and tuning in podcasts. And one of the things I also found really interesting is how long podcasting has been around. I mean, I would say that it's really blown up in the last 5-10 years, but according to some of the history that I did about it, it's got its early roots in the early 2000s, involving from the concept of audio blogging. And the term podcast itself is a blend of iPod and broadcast, which was coined in 2004. And software developer Dave Weiner and former MTV VJ Adam Curry played pivotal roles in the creation. And at first, it was just RSS feed for audio content, while Curry created a program called iPodder, which allowed users to download audio files to their iPod too. So it's been around quite a while, but I would argue that probably in the last, I'd say 5-10 years is when we've really seen it blow up. And I put on there a few key examples of reasons why podcasting, I think, has become so popular. One is that I believe that by podcasting, you can connect with an audience like no other. There isn't a whole lot of back and forths that I get if I write a blog, let's say. I might get some comments, but I'm not going to get that real intimate connection that I believe a podcast provides, because it's more like having a conversation with your audience. And I don't think there's anything that quite replicates that. The flexibility of podcasting, people can listen to it if they're driving, if they're doing laundry, or they're doing other things. And so it has that ability for people to somewhat multitask and then still listen to their podcast. It obviously, they can have it on demand. They can use it when they're doing, like I said, other things. The depth and detail of a podcast, I think, is really important to highlight, because there's not very many mediums, except for maybe a long form story where you can, or a documentary or a book that you can get into the depth that you can with a podcast, and to the detail. One of the reasons I started podcasting was because I would see all these interviews and I would say, why didn't they ask this question? Why didn't they go deeper into that? And so I wanted to podcast because I felt like there was an opportunity for certain things to be publicized that weren't getting out there to the public. And thank you. Yes, it was Sweden. That's what that was. That was our port visit in Sweden when NATO first accepted Sweden into the alliance, and we were commemorating that. So thank you so much, Keith, for that reminder. The diverse voices that you can bring to a podcast. One of the things that I absolutely love about being able to do the Story as a Service podcast is I like to have people on both sides of the aisle. I do not want to live in an echo chamber, even though I will admit I probably lean a little more right of center. I always appreciate and enjoy my friends who are more left leaning, because they can help me see things and help us understand our biases better. The audience engagement, again, like I said, I do my show live And sometimes my audience will think of questions I hadn't thought to ask a guest. So I'm always sort of looking into the right corner and trying to see if there's something in there that someone else has caught. But that's also an amazing experience. And as I go through these slides, if somebody has a question, please put your hand up. And Drew or Noel, if you guys can just let me know, I'm happy to stop and maybe focus in on something, or if somebody has another comment. Next slide. So journalism and podcasting, I think, is a really fascinating area of expertise. And one of the podcasts that I think really kicked this one off was Serial. Serial is now, I believe, it has several seasons. I tuned into the second and the third season, and it was such a fascinating look at the true crime. Some of the one of them was about a Cleveland court system, and another was about a murder and of a high school boy, I want to say. And I just felt that it really covered down again on some of the issues that, and some of the questions and some of the parts that were unresolved that you would only get if you were watching a documentary or reading a book. And so that was really my first introduction to podcasting, was because I am a true crime fan. I find it very interesting. And so Serial was that first one. But now what we've seen, and this has probably only been in the last couple of years, is this emergence of people who were previously journalists like Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson. And I know I'm naming people just on the right, but we're seeing people on the left doing it too. Gavin Newsom, who are now realizing how powerful the medium of podcasting is. We have congressmen who do it now. Dan, can't remember his last name, Navy SEAL. One of you guys will probably remember who I'm talking about. But a lot, yes, Crenshaw. Yeah. So a lot of them are getting into the podcasting business because they're seeing that there's an autonomy as well. And I didn't mention that either, is the idea that a lot of these brands or people, they want to be able to cover things like Candace Owen on their own that they couldn't do with, let's say, when she was at the Daily Wire. But now that she can go outside the Daily Wire and go on and on about the French president's wife, gender or whatever, that was probably something she couldn't cover on the Daily Wire. And so being able to have that autonomy and cover down on some of those issues or do those deep dives that they want to do, I think is one of also the reasons why we're seeing more of journalists go to the podcasting space or start to branch out on their own as entrepreneurs in this new media, which really is an emerging media. Next slide. So planning and structuring, that's probably one of the hardest parts about getting started, is deciding what you want to do for your podcast. When I started my podcast, it was really born out of and to be perfectly frank, it was born out of a frustration with only so much I could do as a public affairs officer. I would look at issues affecting the military community, and I wanted to be able to have more in-depth conversations about some of those issues. And I wasn't in a position to do that. And I had at the time about I was pretty ready to get out of the Navy, but I still had a couple more tours under my belt and some other things I wanted to do. But I wanted to have these more in-depth conversations with people who I admired, people who were giving back to their communities. And I do think that there was always that side of me that wanted to have an advocacy push, that wanted to push to make the military better, make them more accountable, make them more transparent. And I saw having a podcast as an avenue to do that. So it was always designed in my mind to speak to a military audience and then to take some of the lessons that I had learned previously in animal advocacy, in marketing, in public affairs, because I was previously an animal advocate for about, I'd say, 10 years prior to this. So I had done protests outside of pet stores. I had testified on various bills. So I wanted to take all that experience and put that into the show. So that's what I did. I started a stories of service. I wanted to make it very broad because I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with the show. And that was back in April of 2021. So that's the first thing, is why do you want to have a show? What's your purpose of doing it? Then you have to say, okay, well, what type do I want? There's interview-based, which is what I do, investigative, which was Serial, daily news. A lot of people do that. Commentary. That's Megyn Kelly. She's doing daily news. She's doing breaking stories and commentary. A narrative podcast is more you're telling a story and you're bringing that story out. And then you're creating your editorial plan or your script. So that is also, as Drew can probably tell you, a big part of it is scheduling guests and figuring out what your lineup is. And I don't know if Drew's had this. I have, where I do some breaking stories and I do a little bit of the daily news. And so sometimes if a news story comes in, like with the JAG firings, I really wanted to cover that. I knew some of the players behind some of that were closer to that issue than myself. And I did the same thing this week. I'm having Nevada Senate Bill 95. The two of the players that testified on that bill come on my podcast because I watched the hearing and I got very fired up about it. And so I really wanted to do a conversation on it. So that's also part of it. Is so I have an extra day baked into my show each week that I can add if I want to. But then I also have my regular show every Thursday. So that's part of my editorial plan. Next slide. So my biggest recommendation is to start small with the cheap and inexpensive equipment, because as you do this, you don't want to invest a ton of money up front for something that you may or may not stick with. I mean, I think the statistics are startling about how many podcasts don't get off the ground. It's something like 80% of the shows that start will not be around even 6 months later. So that's what I did. I started with very cheap microphones, cheap camera, just a camera that was on top of my computer. And then, I mean, now I have a sound mixer and I have some nicer lights, but I still keep my costs very, very low. And so in the PowerPoint, I do have notes. My husband put together a very detailed list, because someone asked me for it, of every place that I got my lights, where I got my mixer, which camera I use, everything. And it's still, I would say, under $1,500, everything that I have. So that's the first part of it, is what equipment are you going to use? And so you have to think that through. And always understand that your equipment and your tech is not going to be perfect, especially when you start off. But I believe that people who like what you're doing, or they've been following you, or they understand that the engagement is what's more important, and having those conversations, they'll forgive those technical errors. I've had, because I go live, I've had bandwidth issues. I've had shows that just stopped. I've had guests cancel on me, maybe one or two. So I'm always prepared for the unexpected, and I find ways to just work through those technical problems and keep on going. Next slide. So the other thing you have to think about, in addition to the equipment, is how are you going to get your podcast broadcast? So for me, these are the products that I use the most. I use StreamYard to go live. Never had an issue with it. I use Buzzsprout to host my audio side of all my podcasts, because in addition to going live, I extract the audio. And then I also post live to YouTube and to LinkedIn, and also to my personal Facebook. And then my audio goes to Apple, it goes to Spotify. Those are the two largest. And then in addition to that, I didn't put it here, but I have a partnership with Reese of America, where I am one of their podcasters. So I send my audio over to them. And then I also work with a media company called Braid Deck, who takes all my podcasts and they put them into an AI system, and they tweak it up a little bit, and I send them some inputs, and we make it into a blog. So for the people who don't want to watch a podcast or listen to a podcast, they can read an article as well. So that's just another way I consider those to be almost like commercials. And then in addition to that, this past year, I added reels. So after every show, I work with a virtual assistant who helps me put together 4 post-production reels. And then I put those reels out on my social media channels. So again, don't have to do all of this. This is, if you're a one-person show, I would not recommend it. I didn't start off doing all these things. Just as I've been doing this over the years, I started doing more, because I saw that I kind of nerded out on it, and I had fun with it, and I wanted to do more. Next slide. So this is probably one of the hardest things to talk about, is the ethics in journalism, in podcast journalism. And I would say that it's really a tough call. I mean, we're seeing now people like Rogan and Sean Ryan, who are bringing on the presidents of nations. We're seeing so much of this blurry line between hard hitting, honest journalism and then entertainment as podcasts. And I don't think that there's really a clear consensus from the public's perspective about where they're getting this information. But what we do know is that this is a lot of times what is making or breaking elections. It is a new medium that I do believe that leaders need to be engaged on. I wish there were more military leaders, to be honest, who are using podcasts, because there is that emotional truth, that intimacy that you get with a podcast. And I do believe that it's an avenue for people to see the more human side of somebody. I believe that that is what, especially Rogan and Sean Ryan's podcast did with Donald Trump. People were able to see another side to him because he went on some of these podcasts. And I think that unfortunately that was at the detriment of the Democratic side, is that they chose not to engage on those mediums. And I'll always wonder if that could have played a difference in the outcome of the election, because there was just that intimacy and that rawness that you saw with that medium that I don't believe that you get otherwise. Again, there's somewhat trust and transparency in podcasting. I think you can kind of see through somebody when you watch them for an hour or two on a podcast. You can sort of see certain things. I mean, you might not see everything, but I do believe it helps me anyway discern somebody's intent. And I think that there's a little bit more transparency to those kinds of conversations, and it all depends on who the interviewer is too. A good interviewer will ask the tougher and the deeper questions. And sometimes you don't have a good interviewer that'll do that. So it just all depends on who the interviewer is as well. But I do believe that there is that possibility to do that. There's also a lot of other concerns though. There's privacy concerns. I take very cautious steps even when I'm storytelling, not to share specific names, because I'm not telling their story. I'm telling my story, and their story might be different. And I want to be able to give respect to that. So I've always been a bit careful when it comes to things like that. Also, because I am concerned about defamation and slander, which is a real issue that you can encounter as anybody in the media space. Should you defame should someone feel as though they are defamed or slandered? The other issues are you representing, or are you being inclusive? I take very great care to make sure that as I do my podcast, I'm representing diverse voices, diversity of thought. A lot of people don't do that because they are already sort of biased towards a certain leaning, and they tend to have people on that are of that same leaning. I've never wanted to be that kind of a podcaster, so I try my best to not do that. And then legitimacy. And I was talking earlier to Drew about this. I still believe that there really isn't a whole lot of formal education when it comes to this medium, or when it comes to how to work in this space, because it is still such a new space. And sometimes we're confused with just average Instagram influencers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do believe that podcasting is an art. I take it very seriously. And I'm always trying to find ways to be better or to up my game. And I wish going forward, or I hope going forward, that there's more formalized education programs to teach people how to work in this medium and to do some of the things that I believe, Drew, you probably just taught yourself how to do. And most of us are just self-taught doing this, which I don't think is the answer. I think this should be professionalized, just the same way public relations and journalism is professionalized. I do believe that podcasting one day should be professionalized. We're just not ready or there yet I think as a society, because it's still such a new medium to be working in. And next, the fun parts. The most rewarding parts is when people write you an email, or they get in touch with you and they say, wow, Theresa, I'm so glad you did a show on this. And then they go into this long story of how they were personally impacted by this same issue and something along those lines. I mean, that's probably the best way, or a guest is just so happy that their story's finally out there. They've never shared in that way before, and now they have, and they feel like a weight has been lifted because they got this story out there, and they got they got their side of the issue. And I'm always conscientious when I have a guest on that I don't have the other side, and I'm not a journalist. I don't have that responsibility to get the other side, but I'm always very careful too to understand that I'm only getting one aspect of this story and one side of the story. But I do believe that it gives people that opportunity to be heard. Mastering a technical skill, those are always fun when you I figured out over the Christmas break. It was just silly, but for some reason I could not get how to get my thumbnails on YouTube, and they just wouldn't show up properly. And we went back and forth with me and my virtual assistant, and we figured it out, and that was nice. So we got a system down for how we could do that. So that's nice. Working on a team, like I said, I work with a media company. I work with a virtual assistant. Being your own boss, I have full editorial control over the shows that I do and the content that I put out there. And that is something I never had in the military. So it's been very rewarding having that opportunity and being able to do a show that people tune into. It's a small show. It has a small audience, but it is a loyal audience. And that's something I'm quite honored to do and I take very seriously. And then lastly, as I said, I think I'm definitely an advocate by heart. So I do enjoy the idea of taking a hold of a story that I haven't seen covered very much elsewhere and making that a focus on the podcast. And I've been able to do that with a number of issues. And it's been a great honor when people come to me with an issue. The GRAP issue comes to mind, which was the Guard recruiting. They were trying to recruit people to come into the Army. It wasn't just the Guard. And unfortunately, later they found out that program was being run fraudulently. But anybody that was involved in that program sadly got titled, and they're still fighting it to this day to try to get these their records cleared. And I profiled one of the main advocates who's been fighting that issue, and they've seen a lot of traction on that issue since then. So that's just one of many. And I took a bunch of videos that one of the advocates had put together, some personal testimonials, and I shared them throughout the next few weeks after the podcast because I thought it was such an important issue to shine light on. And with that, I think that's the last slide. I hope this has convinced you to start a podcast. It's been so rewarding and something that I really, really enjoy doing. And I'm always here if anyone has any questions or wants to follow up with me offline about this, because it is obviously, as you can tell, something I'm very passionate about.
Theresa, thank you so much for that presentation. And I'm going to open it up to the group for questions, but I'll start out with my own in terms of challenges, right, with podcasting. And especially when you're just starting out and you're beginning to look at what you want to cover, look at how you want to frame your coverage and the things you want to focus on. One of the daunting things about that is how you make your podcast heard, right? You talked about in the beginning that there's been really a boom in podcasting. There's so many podcasts that are out there that cover so many different things. So when you were starting out, what were some of the things that you kept in mind in trying to differentiate your podcast from others, and what were some of the things that you learned along the way to be successful with that?
So a lot of the ways that I would do that is that I would do the deep dive research on the guest, and I would do additional postings on some of the things that they were passionate about or some of the aspects of their work. I was the person growing up in school that would spend hours at the library reading encyclopedias or going through microfilm, which shows you how old I am. And I do the same thing with guest research. Like I look at it as almost like a fact-finding project where I can go into somebody's work because many of my guests have public presences. And so I'm able to either read their book or look at some of their online content. And a lot of times during that fact-finding process, I find myself putting out more postings because there'll be something that I find that I just find so interesting. And then it inspires me to want to ask those questions during the show. But then it also becomes another promo for the episode. I did that with Senate Bill 95. I downloaded the hearing this past weekend. I use my Opus clips, which are these AI. They create these nice, pretty clips for me. And then I started just watching all the clips. And then I found parts of the clips that I was like, oh man, yeah, that's a good part. And so then I started just sharing the clips, and they became little promos for the upcoming episodes. So I can't really overemphasize the need to market and how much that plays a part, and then how much of you that you put into it. And I think that that's something that a lot of podcasters don't do because they're scared to put themselves out there. And it is scary, but I think that that builds trust and it builds loyalty because people see that you're so passionate about this issue, and it makes them want to be more passionate about a particular issue. The other ways, these are the typical ways that people will tell you, is obviously you have bigger name guests. If you have a guest that has a prominent following, then their following is going to come to your show. So that's an obvious way, I think, of gaining more traction on your podcast. Another way is for you to appear as a guest on other people's podcasts. So there's a lot of cross pollination in the military podcaster community where I'm a guest on someone's show or they're a guest on my show. And I love that. Actually, I would love to bring on, and in fact, you're reminding me to talk to my friend Chase Spears about it and have him on as a co-commentator when I do breaking news. Like I'd love to do more breaking news, breaking military news. There's so many things. I'm not retired yet, so I'm a little scared to talk about certain things, but like this, the banning of the books, the firing of the admirals. I mean, there's just so many things going on right now that I would love to have a co-commentator on and do some of the things that I see Megyn Kelly doing. I see Candace Owen doing. So that's another way to build an audience, I think, is to also watch what the greats are doing, whatever the greats are in your, I have my people that I consider my greats, but Drew, you probably have people in your podcast world that you consider your greats, and follow some of the things that you see they're doing to build their reach.
It looks like we have a question from Gloria. I'm going to see if I can unmute you here. 1 second.
Hi, can you hear me, Miss Carpenter?
Yes.
Oh, great. I have the perfect person that might come on your show so that you can interview him. He is a retired 4-star General Spencer.
I would love that. Yes, please. In fact, I have had a couple GOs and FOs on the show. I've had a 2-star naval aviator, Mike Manazar, and I've also had on Greg, bipolar general, Greg Martin. And so
I want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. And congratulations on being Miss Senior Virginia World 2024. That's very exciting.
Yes, actually, I'm 2025, and
Oh.
I am a Navy wife, and the list goes on and on, but I'm really super impressed with your accolades.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Gloria. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'd be honored. I'd be honored to have him connect with me. And I haven't really built out my summer lineup yet. So I'm starting a SkillBridge internship with a dog trainer. I'm doing his social media. And so I haven't really, I've been trying to get that started, and I retire in September. So
Oh, well, congratulations. Do I have your email address? Is it in the chat yet?
I can put it in the chat. I'll put it in there right now for anyone that wants to follow up. And I did see a comment too. I haven't had a chance to take a look. Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Dr. Gloria. I appreciated that. And then Keith said to both me and you, Drew and Theresa, I just attended private Zoom last night hosted by Bruce Parkman, founder of Blue Fusion. It was an intimate discussion regarding startups. Wonder if you have met Bruce. His military and startup experience, along with his hyper authentic and heartfelt personal journey, was the most powerful presentation I've seen in years. Hope you check him out. Truly amazing guy. He would be an excellent future guest. Okay, well, I'll definitely take a look at that. And then Joseph Dunphy, one of the more valuable military programs, in my opinion, has been the family support groups. Care to comment on that? So do you want to comment first, Drew?
I mean, in terms of, under the umbrella of, podcasting and storytelling, speaking for Firewatch at military.com, this is a program that deserves a lot of focus in terms of the ability to support families. And, a lot of the services are kind of going through a metamorphosis through it, especially over the last several years as the global war on terrorism has wound down in many ways. although there are still, aspects of that in Africa and the Middle East. But, it's an interesting question because, as the nature of those deployments and operations change, so does the support structure around it for, programs like families or healthcare, things like that. On the podcast side, in terms of, capturing those types of stories, speaking with families about their experience in those types of programs is definitely important to capture because it gives a human aspect to a lot of the policy changes as things around the globe begin to change. Theresa, I don't know if you had anything else on that, but
Well, I think that covering the military spouse journey is incredibly important. And it's something that, my husband is a military spouse as well. So I know his perspective has been very much shaped by the military experience. He didn't meet me until I was already at, I think, 20 years. So he's been on this journey with me. And it it changes your life. I mean, he was in his 30s when we met, and his entire life changed, and he uprooted everything, left his family behind to be with me. And so, being able to have an outlet, whether it be through podcasting or through any kind of mass media outlet, to get those stories told, I think are incredibly important. And I'm always welcome and able to get that spouse voice when I can. Jennifer Barnhill is a military.com reporter, and I've been in touch with her, and I'd love to have her on as a guest. She has really inspired me to look more into that family side and the family aspect of it. So to your point, it's probably not something I cover a lot on my show, but I should definitely be doing more of because it's such an important aspect of the military experience.
and do we have another question in the group here?
I think Karen has a question.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Hey, Drew. It's good to
Hey.
see you too.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for being here, Theresa. I'm one of the early adopters of podcasting. I've been podcasting since 2006.
Oh, wow.
So my area of specialty right now is profitable podcasting, but I'm curious to ask you a question. What are you we've seen a lot of changes, especially in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But what technologically really gets you going? What are you excited about as it evolves?
I would say the ability to just create shows that are so crisp. Like the AI software can do with Reels is amazing. Like I said, I took a hearing from a state legislature, an MP4 video, an hour long, and I'd never done that. I've always done podcasts. I was like, what's it going to do with a hearing? And it did a beautiful job. And this is just with Opus Clips. It cut it to where it was just, and I mean, I gave it the right prompts. I said 1 minute or less. I wanted 16 by 9, not 9 by 16, so not reels. And it put together 30 really good clips. And from that, I was able to pick about 6 of them that we're going to digest on the show. So that gets me excited. The other thing that gets me super excited is opposing views. So I have only done one show with opposing views, and I did lawyers because I knew they could be polite and they wouldn't scream at each other. But I can't wait to do more. And people know now that I'm trying to do it. I had somebody the other day in a comment say, we need to get on Theresa's podcast and debate this. And I was like, yes, you do. Because that's what I want. I want somebody from the left to say, no, yes, it was wrong that they took all those books out of the Naval Academy library. And then I want somebody on the right to say, no, we need to ban DEI. And I want them to have a really respectful conversation. And this is what happened with the lawyers. And I kind of knew this was going to happen. They met in the middle. They didn't completely agree, but they agreed to disagree on the things that they just saw differently. And then there was enough in common that the conversation was just beautiful. And I really do believe that we all could be doing this if we were willing to have those discussions. So I would say that's probably also what gets me really excited is this idea that with podcasting, I could bring on 2 different people from completely different vantage points, and then hopefully find places where they agree, and then find places where they're just not going to agree, and then we move on.
I do definitely agree with you about podcasting becoming professionalized. I've pushed for that for, a really long time, for people not to take it lightly, because it really does hold some weight, especially the way it's taken off in the last 5 years. But I'm so excited because AI has given us some good assists, but it's not taking away our voices. And
No.
that's never going to happen.
Nope. And that's what's so great about it too. What I do, one of my go-tos with ChatGPT is I write out my social media post all in my voice, my words, everything. And then I just put it in there and I say, make more compelling or make more something. And it doesn't change anything about my tone, about the words, about like the flow or the structure of what I said. It just cleans it up. It's like having a free editor. And I really appreciate that. I do the same thing with my podcast show notes. And I can see where AI can be dangerous, but I can also see
Mhm.
where it can be really helpful. And I think there's that line of you don't use it to plagiarize, don't use it to not do your own work, but use it as like you said, like as an editing or as a tool to make podcasting less of a burden, because most all of us are just one woman, one man shows doing this right now. And I think one day I would like for that to change. And as it gets more professionalized, perhaps we can see it change. But I would argue that every single one of these podcasters, even the big leagues, are struggling with finding the right help to do their shows.
Yep. You know what's so funny? I kind of look at podcasting the same way I do. I know we're of similar ages because you left some clues, but
Yeah.
it reminds me of the evolution of like call waiting and then caller ID. And then I remember before we had 911, you had to dial 0 for everything. So it's evolving in kind of the same way, where I have memories of what it was like before, because back in 2006, 2007, the only place to go was Apple, because they gave it the name. And then once you went to Apple, it would take days to get it done. And now it takes mere moments to upload, to get your podcast. The video element is really coming forward in a really compelling way. But I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your question and congrats on sticking with this medium for so many years. It must be such an evolution to see where it was when you started in 2006 to where it is today.
Yeah, it really is. I started in radio when I was in the second grade. So audio was my first love. But now I'm having to challenge myself to do more, to learn more as the technology evolves and video. That was not a part of my plan, but now it has to be.
Yeah. People want to see your face. They do. I started my podcast with video and audio and live. And a lot of people were like, oh my God, I can't believe you're going to do live. You do live for every show. And I did it out of also necessity, because I didn't want to have to do a bunch of post production edits. And I realized I've listened to people who edit their audio and how they take out all the pauses and the ums and the ahs and everything. But I'll be honest, I personally, I don't mind it. And I prefer just hearing raw audio because to me, it's more authentic. And then I know I'm getting the real conversation.
Oh, we're
So,
going to talk more, because I agree with you on that. It makes it less authentic.
I was listening to somebody who edited a show that I was on, and she did a great job, but it was edited and I could tell. And I was like, oh, I don't like all these like really choppy pauses. Like, I mean, there was no pauses. And that's how I could tell it was edited. It was edited down to get rid of them. And I didn't like it because I'm used to hearing what the real conversation sounds like. And that's what I want.
I'm sure you can't tell, but I like my pauses dramatic. I'm going to let somebody else have the floor.
Oh, I appreciate your question. Your first one, led me to another line of thinking. And I know, Theresa, you had a slide toward the beginning of your presentation about equipment, right? And I know we have folks who are experienced in podcasting here, but for those who are starting out, if you could kind of talk a little bit about maybe 2 or 3 essentials that you see as something that is a must for people starting out, and maybe offer what those specific pieces of equipment are, and kind of the investment that is made into them.
That's a great question. So I would say a $50 mic. I think I put the brand of the mic that I have now, which is less than $50. This one, I have a few different mics. This is, I think, one of my more expensive ones, the Shure. But I started off with a mic that I think was less than $50. And then even just getting I have a Dell camera as my backup camera up here. So if this camera goes out, because this one is on battery life, this one will kick in, and that one was less than $100. So I would say that was 40 or $50. And then so you definitely need to have a camera and a microphone. You do not need headphones. I moved to using headphones because it helped me concentrate on the conversation, but that was something I added later. And then I would say a recording platform. And then you need a place to put, a hosting service for your podcast. I would say, and that's like 4 or 5 things. And that would be less than $200-300. I mean, that's really all your investment would be. You can even use like the free versions of StreamYard or the free trial version of Buzzsprout to start your show, just to see if you're going to stick with it. Like, I would make a small investment up front and then build as you go, because you never know how long you're going to do it or what other things in the way, and life is going to get in the way of doing it. Very few people, I would say 1%, I would guess, of the people who have podcasts make money off of it. So, and that's no different in my mind than being a musician, than being a painter, any creative medium that you take on. You know that 99% of the time you're not going to make money on it. It's going to be a passion project and a creative medium. If you want to make money on it, you've got to hustle for that. And some people want to do that, but for me, I really don't care, since I'm retiring. And this is something that I want to do to give back and to be of service. So the making money side to me it has never been my goal. It was never my intention when I started the podcast. So that's not something I personally have to focus too much on. I could if I wanted to, but it's just not something that I choose to put time into. But even now, I'm a sole proprietor, so I claim all this in my taxes, even though I'm not making any money on the show. We've figured it out that even with this nicer equipment that I have, which I do have in the show notes, I mean, in the notes to the PowerPoint, I put how much I spend on this, and it's still less than $1,600 a year. And that's with everything. The Canva subscription, the Opus clips, clip prescriptions. I have a subtitle subscription. That's another thing that you get into. I'm sure any of you podcasters understand this, that there's not one-stop shop for any of these services. So you have to piecemeal all these different subscription services. In a perfect world, it would just be a flat rate. Like, there's going to be some company one day that's going to come along and just offer everything under one roof. But right now we don't have that. I mean, some of them try a little bit here and there. But at this point, it's a piecemeal of about maybe 10 different subscription services that I use.
I mean, it's a great point too. And, also lends itself to kind of another aspect of this, right? Is within the podcasting and this medium, there are a couple different ways to do it, right? There's, the interview style, a lot of the things that you had alluded to, not to nerd out on tech, but shotgun microphones, like this one that I have right here, which is a little beat up after a few years of use. But in terms of like the range that you can get with some of the tech that's out there now is pretty astounding. And there are those the Rode microphones that you can clip onto folks for interviews in the field. They're very small and portable, run on batteries, quickly recharge. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and there are a lot of good things tech wise that have a lower barrier to entry in terms of price too, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, I've noticed things have gone down in price, even in the 4 or 5 years that I've done this. Things have become more accessible, and the barriers to entry are lower. When I first started thinking about a podcast, I was intimidated by the audio editing. I thought that I wasn't going to be able to overcome that, and going live was part of the reason why I decided to do that. Was I was like, well, if I go live, it's just going to be the same conversation that I do for the audio. And so that was how I worked through that in my mind anyway, was that I wasn't going to even edit the audio. And I add an intro, and then I eventually, added that same, it's my father. He's a broadcaster. And he recorded my first podcast. My first podcast was with my dad. And I had him do an intro. I wrote a script for him and he read it. And that is actually the intro for every single one of my episodes.
Nice. Gloria, do you have a question?
Yes. So, Commander Carpenter, is that what they call you?
Or Teresa, you could just say Teresa, but yes, at work, people would call me that. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I love your voice. It is so intelligent sounding and soothing and interesting. You sound like an expert at podcasting and broadcasting. So in the chat, I put General Spencer's email and
I
his
see it.
name. Yes,
Okay.
he texted me back and he said he would love to be on your show. And if you would reach out to him,
I will.
he will be happy. And you want me to send you his phone number in the chat? I can do that as well.
I think the email is just fine. I have it right here, generalspencer53@gmail.com. I will send him a note.
Yes, he's waiting for you. I sent your picture and your write-up, your bio. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gloria. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
One of the things that you had talked about in terms of the ethics portion of the presentation is kind of this balance, right? Like the medium, can present a gray area in terms of how it's presented, how listeners, consume that information. And I'm wondering, like, where you see the line between, podcasting and journalism and advocacy. How do you differentiate that, and how do you be transparent with your listeners in terms of being able to say, hey, these are my aims in terms of those different categories?
That's such a good question, Drew, because there's a lot of people who feel these days that journalism as it was in 10, 15 years ago isn't the same today. There's a fascinating conversation that I highly recommend with Megyn Kelly and a New York Times reporter. If you just go, it was just in the last 2 weeks. And the New York Times reporter is a old-fashioned straight stick journalist. And Megyn Kelly, of course, has transitioned to the dark side and gone to this new podcast medium. And the New York Times reporter's kind of giving her shit about it. And Megyn Kelly holds her own, but it was a really fascinating back and forth about how Megyn Kelly still considers herself a journalist, but she's not completely a journalist anymore. If you want to go back to like what the true ethics and canon of journalism is, because I would argue though that in this new media space, many of the people that we used to think are journalists do in fact have a very obvious bias. I mean, when you watch certain news broadcasts these days, whether it be Fox on the conservative side or MSNBC more on the liberal side, I would say that you see the bias is very obvious. And even in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you see a big bias compared to Newsmax. And so I think journalism is changing. There are still really unbiased journalists out there. I would argue Warhorse is a great example of a very unbiased, at least in the military community. They don't seem to be partisan at all in any way. But we've seen in a lot of the military, even the military publications, there seems to be a bias. And that to me bleeds into advocacy. It does. They may not say it's advocacy, but it seems, it smells, looks like a duck, walks like a duck. It seems like it's advocacy focused. And so I think what people are seeing with podcasters is we're just being transparent about our bias. If we have a bias like Megyn Kelly or Candace Owen, I'm just using them as examples because, they're the kind of the people that I look to as my podcast mentors. And even Sean Ryan, he's the same way. They tell you up front what their bias is and what they think and how they're seeing an issue. And so I think right now what's happening is the public is having a harder time trusting some of these other outlets as they read an article or they see how the headline is written or they see the words that are chosen. Like I saw them the other day and nothing against military.com, but it was like so-called DEI initiative. And I'm like, Yeah, I mean, there was just ways, and there were just very, very carefully chosen words that if you didn't understand media bias, you might not know what was going on, but they're almost manipulating you as you read some of the words. So for me, ethically, I just think it's great to be transparent and say what my bias is and say, well, yeah, this is how I see the subject right now. I'm open to changing my mind if I have new information, but this is where I see the subject now. And I think that unfortunately, there's a lot of journalistic outlets, or there's a lot of journalism now that is advocacy or is partisan, but it's masquerading as journalism. That's just my personal opinion, Drew. I mean, you could tell me if you see the same thing, but that's kind of what I've been seeing.
Well, I mean, it goes to the age-old debate about subjectivity and objectivity, and the existence of the latter. And when you set any reporter on a story, it's gonna be different, right? Whether one reporter does it or another does it, because you have your lived experiences and things that you see in terms of how you approach a story, and that's gonna, one of my colleagues is gonna write a story different than I write a story, and same thing with any other journalist, they're gonna tell it in a different way. But for in terms of podcasting specifically, I think one of the harder, I guess, unsung challenges between in the podcasting world is kind of the editing and production slog that goes with it. Can you tell me a little bit about that and your experience there?
Yeah, that's probably the least part, the part about my job that I like the least. In fact, that's why I brought on an assistant, was because after every show, I would have to extract the audio. I would have to put it on my Buzzsprout server. I then would have to send a submission over to Parade Deck. Then I also upload the latest episode on my website and on a mobile briefcase that I use. And it just got to be like this thing that I would dread after every show. And so I decided to bring on an assistant who takes care of some of that lift for me so that I can focus more on guest research, but I still do all my own guest scheduling. And that is another part of the podcast process that is very time consuming, is the back and forth with the guest, and to collect everything that you need before the show. So if you promo the episode, which I do because I record live, and so I want people to participate live. So then you have to get the guest bio, the guest headshot. There's a lot to it. You have to set the show up in StreamYard, send the link out, all those things, and but those are just, I mean, that's just the work of doing a show, and any endeavor that you have is going to have work. And so I just kind of look at that as sort of, that's the lift of the show. And then the reward on investment is the feedback that you get, the actual conversation that you have. I can't tell you how many nights I've done a show and I go out into the living room and I see my husband. I'm like, oh, that was such a good conversation, and that's when, you're doing something that you love. But I see a question, a couple comments here. Karen, you said the lines are definitely blurred between advocacy and journalism. Trust and integrity have been eroded. I agree. Um, I do believe that the media outlets, and it's not just the journalism, Drew, in my opinion, that their lived experiences. It's also whatever the editorials push is, like the manager or who's ever, not the manager, but who's ever running the media outlet, and what. I mean, I hate to say it. I don't know if every outlet does it that way, but I mean, there are certain stories that Fox won't cover. There are certain stories that MSNBC won't cover. I mean, I to this day don't understand why the G-Rap story was just a Fox story. Like, that should have been, but you'll see, like, or if it's a sexual assault story, you'll see that more of the left covers those issues. And that's disturbing to me. As an advocate, those should not be partisan issues, but sadly, they do become partisan issues, and I think that's unfortunate. So that is one of the reasons why I do believe trust in journalism, or trust in the media, has eroded, is because we see that only certain types of stories are getting covered by certain outlets, and we as advocates don't want to see that, and so a lot of people have turned to podcasting because of that. Do viewers want unbiased news and current events in podcasts? I don't. Drew, you want to take that one?
I think it's an interesting question, and I personally don't predispose, what my readers or listeners want, right? Um, it's I'm sure they do want, things that may confirm their own biases or things like that, but that's, I don't think that's the role of, journalism or the press in general. Doesn't mean that, that existence or that desire, to have those types of stories is there, of course. But, being able to, present it in a way, in doing your due diligence and in contacting multiple different sources, multiple different points of view, experts, asking the questions that go beyond, the target, right? Like where did this person get their information or things like that, is important to showcase, and it's not going to be perfect every time, but to at the bottom line, being able to inform the public, provide accountability for institutions that are or people that are in power, and then raise awareness, or showcase voices that typically don't get heard. Are the important things to highlight, and whether readers want to see that or not is up to them. Teresa.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that people think they want to have unbiased, but I think that we're all drawn to sources that confirm our bias. I know I am. I mean, and I'll admit that. Like, I will definitely watch more of things that confirm my bias than things that go against my bias. But I try my best to expose myself to those unbiased voices. I mean, I have a friend, John McCordle, comes to mind. He's a Navy captain and he's very active on LinkedIn. And yeah, we definitely did. We're friends, and we definitely disagree on things, but I love reading his posts and I love getting his perspective. So I try my best to expose myself to different perspectives because I don't want to live in that echo chamber and have only my bias confirmed, because I think that's how you become more polarized. And once you're polarized all the way to one side, I believe you're easily controlled and manipulated. And so I always want to make sure that I'm doing whatever I can to resist that push, because I think that the media and sensationalism and all that will always, certain types of media, not unbiased journalism, ethics, all those, but certain types of outlets will try to push you to the right, because if they push you and they energize you and you become this, very polarized and angry individual on either side, I do believe you're more easily controlled and easily manipulated. But if you do your best to try to stay in the middle, somewhere along the middle, number one, you just get exposed to better perspectives and you become a more well-rounded person. But number two, you keep an open mind and an open heart. And I think that that's really important as a human, to just be that way. So.
Did we have another question in the group?
I see there's just a comment from Darius. He says, thanks. I was just wondering, I think he's answering to your comment. I was just wondering, because I feel this country has become so divided that it has pushed, exactly, that's what I was saying, a lot of viewers and listeners into their viewpoints, and anything they hear from journalists they don't agree with, they attack the messenger and accuse them of being biased. It goes both ways. Oh, I agree. He says, that's my view of the state of the media as a current radio and TV reporter in New York City. Darius, I completely agree with you.
I would love to chime in on this if I can. I will tell you this. Do viewers want unbiased news, current events podcast? They are as many people looking for information on red-eyed tree frogs as they are on current elections. There is something for everybody. There are over 5 million podcasts, and by nature, podcasts are global. So if you want to explore doing unbiased news, I would say examine what that means to you, because Theresa made some excellent points about bias and how we gravitate towards our own bias. But there are just as many people looking for a certain kind of leaf that's across the street from the forest I'm looking at right now out my window, as there are for people with political views. There is room for everyone in this space. This is a truly democratized space because you get to choose. And I've always said, and I say in my classes all the time, this is the freest form of the First Amendment
It
because
really
it's not
is.
regulated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not regulated. You can be where
That's a
you
great
want,
point.
say what you want, whether and you know, we're not intending to harm anyone, but some of these views have harmed people. Some of them have resulted in violence, but some of them have resulted in extreme joy and people finding therapists and, you know, having help with their children. But they are as many interests as they are thoughts about what people are interested in.
Yeah. You know, that's such a gosh, I never thought about that because I'm trying to think of something else that's as free and unfiltered as a podcast. And the only thing that I can think of or what comes to mind is a book because now people can self-publish, but I don't think a book is ever going to have like a self-published book on Amazon, the kind of reach that a podcast can have, especially if the person who's producing the podcast has a sizable social media following or already has an audience. I had an audience before I started my podcast. And then as I started my podcast, my audience grew. But even to this day, my standalone posts on LinkedIn will still do better a lot of times than my podcast will in terms of reach because I think people just like having that personal relationship or they like the storytelling aspect of some of the posts that I do. But absolutely. This is such a powerful medium. And
It
the fact
is.
that any citizen can do this and it's really changed the game in terms of citizen journalism. I've always believed that citizens journalists or citizens news tellers or storytellers should be hand in hand or go alongside professional journalists. I do believe that professional journalists still have a place. Like I said, Drew, your piece about the Marine that we were discussing before the show, that's powerful. And that was a story that you had stuck with for a number of years because I went back after when I read your first story about it, I started digging and I went back into some of your previous reporting on it. And you're not going to get that with a podcaster or a citizen journalist. I mean, they're not going to always be able to have those resources and have the ethics and some of the hard hitting archival research skills to do some of the things that I think that professional journalists are trained to do. So
It's also
absolutely.
the reason why a lot of journalists don't podcast because they have contracts that they have to adhere to. And it's very important in how they use their voice if they're the voice of a station, television or radio or otherwise. They're not able to podcast because they don't own it. And ownership is a huge thing.
Yep. Noel, is there a way that you could take the PowerPoint, the one he said, if you have that document handy that your husband helped you put together on your
I can put
equipment?
that in, Teresa. I was just going to ask. Actually, it's a little too long for this chat, but Noel, I think if we're able to send it out to the RSVP group afterwards, does that work?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can look at that. I
Yeah.
put in the notes in the PowerPoint. I have in the notes those lists, and then I also have some extra notes that things I just didn't get a chance to read during the show. So if anyone wants to check that out, they can. And then Darius, I saw your question. How large of a following did you have before starting the podcast? So I was probably at maybe 10 to 15,000 followers across all my social media platforms, and now I'm probably at about 25 maybe thousand followers. And my shows, by the way, vary from, gosh, I could have a show with just maybe 500 downloads or 500 views all the way up to 5,000. I mean, I probably don't go beyond that per episode. My audio downloads, I think, are about 12,000 right now just on audio, but I've done 200 shows. So it's still pretty small. And then I have probably 15,000, 12,000 followers on LinkedIn, I think. And then with all my other platforms, maybe about 15 to 17,000. But I really don't obsess over that very much. I more or less look at what shows do better than other shows. That's what's really fascinating is shows that I don't think are going to do good that do really good. And then shows that I know are going to, like the Jag one, the Jag firings. I knew that was going to do really well. That's probably been my most popular episode lately. Or if I have a really prominent guest, like I had Shouta Hill. He's the Captain Hill. He's the Ike commanding officer when they got attacked during the Houthis attacked their ship, the carrier in the Red Sea. That was a huge news story. And then as he got back from deployment, he just did a couple podcasts. So his show did very well. But one that did not do well, here's a surprising one, was Sam Shoemate. He was on the Sean Ryan show because he got a correspondence from the Cybertruck person that exploded the Cybertruck on January 1st. And he's been a whistleblower in the military community. He goes under terminal CWO on Instagram. And I thought his show was going to just really blow up. And because he's a whistleblower, and he speaks truth to power, and he's just very provocative. And that show didn't do that well. Looking back, I think the reason why is because a lot of those military whistleblowers are confined to X. And they do really well on X, but if you try to bring them over to LinkedIn, the professional, more academic-ish jobs, so, more professional LinkedIn crowd isn't as excited to hear from them. A lot of them are COVID whistleblowers from the military COVID mandates, and people just aren't as interested on LinkedIn about those issues. So that was interesting to me. That surprised me. And he said, I asked because I wanted to know where your jumping point was, because I have more than 5,000 on X and Twitter. So I want to see where mine is in comparison. Yeah. I mean, that's 5,000 still a really good number to start off. And if you have any questions, Darius, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'm happy to share anything and everything that I've learned up to this point. And I'm always still, continuing to learn.
I think we have some time for a few more questions in this session. Is there anyone who wants to jump in? And if not, I have a couple more for you, Theresa.
Okay.
It might seem a little tedious to talk about, but it's a really important aspect of putting a story together, and that's sourcing guests, right? When you're looking to talk to a story, is it something that you see on social media? Is it folks that you have connections with that you're like, hey, you have a story to tell? How do you bring them on? And then kind of getting into the nitty gritty, right? Like, tell me about the scheduling process for you in terms of working with folks to actually get them on the show.
Okay, so I do about 99.9% on this phone right here. That's actually my husband right there. He has this thing where if I open the phone, his eyes open. So you saw that for a moment. But yeah, so that's what I do. I find guests by listening on social media. So I scroll, I do the same things, the mindless scrolling that we all do, that we say we don't do, but we all do. And sometimes I come across a story that just really captivates me, and I want to know more. So like I said, the Senate Bill 95 was the latest one. That's a great example. I had covered Allison Bailey's story, which is what this bill was started because of. The mother of Allison Bailey she was a soldier who got, I mean, it's a whole long story, but she got kicked out of the Army after being in there many, many years, and she was never given an opportunity to turn down her NJP and go to court martial. And so Senate Bill 95 is hopefully going to be now only 5 states instead of 6 that do not allow Guard members the opportunity to turn down NJP in lieu of court martial, because what that does is it denies them the due process rights of being able to question their witnesses, being able to cross-examine witnesses, being able to bring forth their own evidence. They can't do any of that. So they only have NJP or administrative punishment. And so that was a story that I had been following for a number of years because it was a previous guest that I had on. So I knew that she had contacted a legislator, and then I saw that there was a hearing, and I, had some extra time on a Saturday morning. So I watched the entire hearing, and I was just shocked at some of the things that were said. And so I was like, I've got to do a show on this. And I knew 2 of the people who were testifying because I'm involved in this advocacy community. So that was how I got that show. Sometimes it's a post somebody does. So I'll see a post on Instagram, or I'll see a post on LinkedIn about something, and I'll contact them. Sometimes it's because I'm involved in the military creator space. So we have like the military influencer conference in September. I've met a lot of creators through that. So a lot of us creators, military content creators, we network with one another. So I'm in touch with a lot of the other people. A veteran with a sign is one. He's great. There's a lot of active duty military content creators. Well, I wouldn't say a lot. There's probably less than 10, but we all know each other. And so we bounce ideas off of one another. And so sometimes that's how we get story ideas. I'll see something that this content creator has, and then I'll want to do a story on it. Rob Green is a good example. He's a COVID mandate military active duty commander who has spoken out. He's probably the most outspoken active duty person. I can't believe the things that he's done, and he's written a book. So it's just people that I find on social media, or a breaking news story. I read the story about the Ferris Doctrine in military.com about Staff Sergeant Carter, who was paralyzed at Walter Reed, and immediately knew that that was going to be a story I wanted to cover, and I wanted to tell the story of Ferris. So a lot of times it's because I want to dig deep into an issue. And I know like the best way to learn about that issue is to contact the people who are involved. So I'll reach out, and sometimes I don't get a response. I mean, that happens a lot. But more often than not, I do. And that's amazing when I do. And sometimes I'll follow up a couple times too, because I know people follow up with me a couple times. And sometimes the third or fourth time they follow up is when I get a chance to respond. So that's how. And then as far as scheduling goes, I do everything in the phone. I have I just use my calendar on here. I have one of those typical, Google calendars, and you can, as you go through it, you can see I have shows on certain dates. And then as I set up my podcast, I send somebody a calendar invite, and sometimes, and it's all free. I don't pay for a calendar service. I tried Calendly for a little while, and I just thought it was too hard. So then I went back to using a Gmail calendar, and sometimes people don't get the emails. And so I always follow up and I say, did you get the email? And then I'll forward it if they didn't, but most of the time they get it. And that's how I do it. So it's
And-
pretty simple.
And how do you use the virtual assistant again?
Okay, so I found her through a friend's nonprofit. She referred me to her, and she works a shift for me every day from my time, 7 to 9 a.m. And so she'll do whatever I need, whether it be podcast post production, or she designs graphics for me. And I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to promote her services, but she's amazing, and she's always looking for extra work. I mean, I've referred a lot of my friends to her. A couple of my friends have hired her, and she's awesome. She does all my my graphics. She does, like I said, the post production, things like that. So I have her help me with a lot of that, and that takes away some of the load, and it really helps. But it's I got very lucky to find somebody that I trust, because I know a lot of people struggle with that, and I will appreciate it for as long as I have it. I mean, maybe one day I won't have it, but for now, it's been a blessing.
And my last question for you, Theresa, is going post-retirement, right? Where do you see your podcast going? You see it expanding? Where do you want to take it?
I honestly see myself just deepening into what I'm doing. Like, for an example, I don't have the book, but there's a guy named Franklin, Annis. He's got a book about Captain Alan Partridge. And it's like a 300-page book, and it's all about stoicism. And I've been really wanting to dig into it, but I just haven't had the time. So as I see myself retiring, I see myself just sitting down for a few days and really digging into some of these books. I see myself taking more notes. I just see myself asking better questions. Like I said, I started this as a passion project, and I think that I love what I'm doing, and it's so much fun. I hope to also incorporate things in the local community. I've seen this guy, America's First Vets is an organization. It's a political organization that I joined, and I would love to incorporate some of the stuff I'm doing with my podcast with some sort of local politics or local civic actions. And maybe I can do some in-person stuff along with that, and do some stuff here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. So I think that would also be a really wonderful way to take what I'm doing and expand upon it, is if I could bring in some of the more of the local community into the podcast.
And Darius, I appreciate your question in the chat, because that's my next thing. But Theresa, if is there a good way for folks to contact you if they have any follow-up questions?
Sure. So I'm on all the socials. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I did put my email address in the chat, but I can also put it in here again. But I'm really easy to find on, like I said, every social media channel. So you can either find me through my socials, or you can find me on my email address. But I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have any guest recommendations or anything, like I said, I got one already tonight. Really appreciate that. Please let me know. Today was my last official day of work, so this is really the new beginning. I'm burning leave down until my skill bridge, and going to start that next chapter. So I'm really excited.
Great. Well, Theresa, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us here for this webinar. It was really informative, and I appreciate the work that you put in to it. Noelle, just to wrap up, in terms of the equipment list, if there's a way that we can get that out to folks so they can view it, that'd be great. And then next month we're continuing the journalist development series, and I'll put Noelle's email here in the chat. But if you have any ideas for coaches or want to see certain topics, you can send her an email there and make that suggestion. But I appreciate you all being here. And Noelle, if there's anything else that you want to leave us with, please let us know. But if not, I'll let everyone go.
Awesome.
No,
Thank
all
you,
good here.
everybody.
Thank you both.
Sorry, go ahead, Noelle.
I said, no, all good here. Thank you both.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you. Thanks, Teresa. Have a good
All
one,
right.
everyone.
Yeah.
Good
Thanks,
night,
everybody.
you guys.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.